In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Balkans, and World War III. What could possibly go wrong? So you, the viewers, most voted for this alternate history video about if World War III started in 1999 in the breakup of Yugoslavia. The Third World War could start either between NATO and China, or between NATO and Russia, or see NATO against Russia and China. All three would be different scenarios and take place in 1999, so for the purposes of this video, I'll cover the third one, being war breaking out between NATO against Russia and China. But first I'm going to give you some context on why and how war could have broken out between these various belligerents. The Kosovo War lasted from February 28, 1998 until June 11, 1999, and was fought between the forces of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which was Serbia and Montenegro, which controlled Kosovo before the war, and they were fighting against the Kosovo Albanian separatist militia known as the Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA. The KLA had previously launched an insurgency against Yugoslavia in 1995, which erupted into the full-scale Kosovo War. The KLA would launch several terror attacks against Serbs who responded with ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, but not genocide. The conflict ended when NATO intervened by the beginning of airstrikes in March of 1999, which resulted in Yugoslav forces withdrawing from Kosovo. Now that's just a basic summary of the war there, and there's a whole lot more to it that I'm not going to talk about. Now on May 7th, 1999, during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia in Operation Allied Force, 5 U.S. Joint Direct Attack Munition-guided bombs hit the People's Republic of China's embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 Chinese journalists, and it completely outraged the Chinese public. President Bill Clinton apologized for this bombing and stated that it was an accident. Although conflict between China and the U.S. was averted, in this alternate timeline, China will believe it's a deliberate attack and Clinton will be very slow to apologize. Turning to the NATO-Russia aspect of things, Russia had been instrumental in helping Yugoslavia agree to peace in Kosovo and wanted to maintain Russian peacekeeping in Kosovo, which all sounds good on paper, but Russia was ready to partition Kosovo, where the north comes under Serbian control and the south would go to Albanian control. Therefore, Russia was not given a peacekeeping region in Kosovo, and Russia responded by sending in troops on June 11, 1999, in a column of about 30 Russian armored vehicles, who had been part of the international peacekeeping forces in Bosnia, and they then moved into Serbia. Their destination was the Pristina International Airport in Kosovo to get there ahead of NATO troops. On June 12, 1999, the Pristina Airport incident occurred where Russian troops had occupied the airport and the British and Norwegians arrived outside of the airport afterwards. General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe at the time, ordered that the British were to take the airport by force. However, the British, under the command of Mike Jackson and James Blunt, refused Clark's orders, and a peaceful resolution was found that avoided conflict after the Russians could not supply their own forces at the airport. Now, I highly recommend that you look up the Pristina airport incident for yourself, as there's a lot more to it. Conditions to escalate and spiral this scenario into being World War III would be if both Mike Jackson and James Blunt were not present in Kosovo, and instead had 2 other British officers who would be definitely more likely to comply with Clark's order in Kosovo to attack the Russians. In this British attack against the Russian airport, the British used an armored assault, and then in order to create World War III, will also have to have there be casualties on both sides at Pristina, so that both sides feel very justified in fighting one another. Both the Pristina airport incident and the NATO bombing of Belgrade occurred a month apart from one another in 1999. So in this alternate history scenario, there will be a Russo-Sino-Loose alliance in this anti-NATO mindset. Due to the poor diplomacy of the Clinton administration, neither the Pristina airport incident nor the Belgrade embassy bombing will be properly solved, and the conditions for World War III have been set. Needless to say, the UN is absolutely pointless here. First, every member of the Security Council is involved in World War III in Yugoslavia. Second, the UN was very ineffective in the Bosnia War and the breakup of Yugoslavia as a whole. Therefore, I feel like the UN would try to do peacekeeping of some kind, but they're not going to be very significant at all in this World War III. As a side note and some foreshadowing, the UN being so ineffective would likely cause many member states to wonder if it's even legitimate in the post-Cold War world. It's kind of like the League of Nations, and after World War III, there would definitely be some reforms at the UN if it is not replaced by a new global institution. World War III begins in June, but both sides agree not to use nuclear weapons due to mutually assured destruction. In the 90s, the US was the global hegemon and single global superpower, as the Russians and Chinese are more of a B-tier state. There was also large-scale denuclearization at the end of the Cold War, and although it's very likely for everyone to re-amp up their nuclear arsenals, I don't think that anyone would be willing to use tactical nukes in battle. This war would therefore become a large proxy war in Eastern Europe and South Asia, with minimal direct conflict between military forces from Russia, China, and NATO, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of direct action covert missions. Covert and clandestine actions would undoubtedly be taken by both sides. However, Russia and China are not the best of friends either, and I feel like there would be some action by each other taken upon one another. I won't go into the details for specific operations here because that would be too much to unpack in this video. But one thing is for sure is that both sides would back principal agents in direct action missions against one another. But due to mutually assured destruction, I believe that this alternate World War III would be a large collection of other conflicts. Now, before we look at the early war in Europe, I'll do a rough overview of the state of the opposing military forces in 1999. The Russian military is outfitted with mostly old and outdated Soviet equipment and is rampant with corruption as well as massive inflation. Russia had previously seen a poor performance in the First Chechen War and would be sending out the same military into the rest of Eastern Europe. Russia's forces would see a lot of casualties going into other countries within Eastern Europe and would see themselves in a very justified position as they would take the angle that NATO attacked them in Kosovo. China is also not at the big height of military technology and readiness at this time, but is modernizing fast in 1999. The Chinese public also feels heavily justified against NATO for the embassy bombing, but overall I think the combined Russia and China is about equal to NATO. Russia is also heavily deep in the chaos of the 90s where the mafia and hyperinflation essentially ruled most of Russia. Yeltsin is also still the president of Russia and would likely not step down on New Year's Eve 1999 like he did in our timeline unless the war is just going that poorly and if the public turns on him even more than they had in our timeline. Oligarchs in Russia support the war effort in exchange for whatever political influence is up for grabs within Russia. The point is that Russia in the 90s under Yeltsin, life was pretty terrible and it's going to get a whole lot worse with a war on their hands despite a brief rally around the flag period. Much of NATO's forces and NATO allied forces are still riding off the high of the Gulf War and is very modernized. The European theater is also starting a few months after the fourth NATO enlargement where Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic had just joined NATO. Therefore, NATO forces will solidify these countries as well as other partner states in Eastern Europe. NATO owns the skies with air supremacy and would likely be conducting massive airstrikes and bombardments against Russian-backed forces that are attacking NATO countries and NATO allies. The early war in Europe sees Russia attack into countries that would be, in our timeline, joining the 5th NATO enlargement in 2004. So that would mean Russia goes into countries like the Baltic states immediately and also conducts subversion campaigns in other countries like Slovakia. Ukraine is split between who is supporting Russia and who's supporting NATO, but I feel like Russian intelligence gets the better end of Ukraine in 1999 and Russia passes through the country. NATO moves into other countries wanting to be safe from Russia like Slovenia and Bulgaria. NATO airstrikes occur as Russian ground troops directly engage in proxy conflicts in the quote-unquote neutral zone of Eastern Europe, which essentially becomes a free-for-all as long as there's not massive direct NATO-Russian fighting. The same goes for Yugoslavia, but given Russia's relatively poor military state, they would tolerate a lot of war crimes that their allied paramilitary groups and principal agents would definitely commit. The KLA simply just becomes another faction that is supported by NATO and similar paramilitaries and other groups are supported by Russia. One major certainty, though, would be that the bulldozer revolution that occurred in our timeline would still happen and is possibly accelerated. For those who don't know, the bulldozer revolution was the overthrow of the Milosevic regime in Yugoslavia in 2000 and was caused by a variety of factors, including the Yugoslav Wars. In this alternate timeline, I think that it would come sooner with World War III having already started with Milosevic in power and various NATO intelligence organizations seeing it as free real estate. Foreign fighters is another aspect that I should probably touch on in this video. The 90s, especially the late 90s, were a time where many non-state actors and militias such as terrorist groups and insurgent groups were exponentially growing within the public eye. Many would go to Yugoslavia and other areas to fight against whatever enemy that they saw fit, or more likely to carve out their own territory out of a failed state that are the results from the fighting. Many groups were both anti-Russian and anti-NATO, so it would be a very chaotic hotbed of insanity and power vacuums. Turning to the early war in Asia, China would definitely want to go for Taiwan and want to undermine Western allied states in Asia. However, China doesn't have as big a stake in World War III coming out of Yugoslavia as NATO and Russia did. I think World War III on the China front would be more of a covert war and undermining regimes as China bides their time watching NATO and Russia fight one another while China tries to modernize. Depending on how the U.S. public reacts to the Third World War, the 2000 presidential election is likely between Vice President Al Gore on the Democrat side, as the Clinton administration was the incumbent in World War III and Gore won the nomination in our timeline. He would most likely run on a platform of maintaining the current leadership in a time of war. Perhaps the Republican challenger in 2000 would want to negotiate with Russia and pursue diplomacy, in contrast to the perception that Gore is committed to the war. But maybe some Republicans see World War III as a chance to export some nice democracy into Yugoslavia, Eastern Europe, and Asia, as neoconservatism is a pretty strong Republican base here. But the main thing is that the Russians took Pristina airport to prevent NATO from getting it, and the American public, as well as the rest of NATO's public, feels very justified against Russia. On the Asia front, Republicans would likely blame Clinton and want to negotiate with China about the Belgrade bombing. Therefore, I believe that John McCain would be the Republican challenger with a hawkish platform towards Russia, Yeltsin, and with support of NATO and the proxy madhouse that is Eastern Europe, while he also runs on a reconciliation effort with China to drive them away from Russia, with the carrot of free trade and the stick being the full might of America. Now, how this 2000 election goes is beyond me, and that a lot has been changed. Now, as far as how the war goes, who wins, and the peace agreement afterwards, I cannot make a remotely accurate prediction here. But some things that would be to note is that the Second Chechen War possibly still breaks out, which diverts more Russian troops from the Eastern Front. The possible quote-unquote end to the war would be all beyond attempting accuracy, but I would just be speculating a lot on assumptions and uncertain conditions here. However, if you want my best guess here, I would say NATO comes out on top as a result of another Russian revolution in 2000, as Yeltsin really sucks and Russians hate being in a mafia state. This new revisionist regime makes a temporary peace with NATO and does what China is doing with building up and modernizing their forces for the next second Cold War, as Eastern Europe is in ruins, as everyone is preparing for a possible next war between these powers. With all of that, I'll end the scenario and the video. Yeah, I know it probably wasn't as detailed as you would have liked, but there's a lot that I would have to speculate on, and it just wouldn't be as accurate as I would have wanted it to be. And this was, of course, just one possible scenario for if war broke out from the Kosovo War. What do you think would have happened had war broken out and then escalated into World War III in 1999? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.